Welcome to Sollu Kaburz podcast. And what an important topic do I have today? It is coronavirus vaccines, COVID-19 vaccines. And with me today is one of the best science educators that I have ever stumbled across on social media, Rob Swanda. If I'm pronouncing your name wrongly, please correct me. He is a PhD student of biochemistry in Cornell University, which is an Ivy League school, which for Indians, if you want to relate, it's like the IITs of US universities. So he's the creme la de creme when it comes to his subject. And Rob, can you please mention like what is your exact specialty of the PhD subject that you do really?
Sure. Yeah. So my PhD focus is in biochemistry, and my thesis topic is actually designing mRNAs that can target cancer cells for destruction.
So you're going to be the guy who's going to save the world from cancer.
Maybe a small piece. We'll try.
Lovely, lovely. But there is a reason why I have you on this podcast, Rob, because up until now, through the pandemic, whenever I used to see the news of vaccine development for COVID-19, this disease, I was like, I won't be the early adopter. I'm like, I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna make sure that no one is turning into zombies, and then I'll take the vaccine. All right. Until I come across your work. I mean, you have one amazing YouTube channel where you explain the little itsy bitsy tiny details of how vaccines work and how they are effective in protecting your body, and you use very simple language that is very accessible to dummies like me, which is fantastic. And I'm a big fan of your work, and I'm sure you must be getting the same message from many people who watch your work. What was the point of starting this YouTube channel? Because you don't come across a PhD student doesn't become a YouTuber just like that.
No, not at all. So back in December was when the US was starting to have the FDA look over some of these mRNA vaccines, and that was being in the news all the time. This was being heard about, and my parents actually contacted me and said, what is this like vaccine about? Do you think it's safe? Are you going to get it? They had heard the word mRNA before because I've used that when I've talked to them about my work, but they're not scientists, so they're like, we don't know. Is this safe? Like we're a little bit worried. And I said, okay, like let me explain it to you because it's actually quite cool and quite simple. And so we were on a Zoom call, and I was just explaining to them on paper, and then by like 10-15 minutes, and then they said, wow, like we really understand, this is cool, like are we going to get a PhD now, like we understand this. I'm like, okay. And then they asked, okay, could you make this into a video, because some of their friends and some of my other family were like, would love to know this, and since we all can't be together, like it'd be the best way to share this information. So I ended up making that video and sent it to them, and then I thought, okay, like I'll post it on Twitter, I'll post it on Instagram. I only have like 100, 200 followers, but at least somebody can learn. And then it just kind of like skyrocketed, and
Right.
was shared and shared and shared, and still
Lovely.
being shared today.
Pretty glad to see that accurate information being shared rather than the 5G coronavirus bullshit. The fake
Yes.
news. How texting works. Do you have one of
Yeah.
those uncles who share weird news on WhatsApp in America as well?
Yes, unfortunately. And I
Same.
quickly put a stop to that.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. That's exactly why I have you here, brother. Let's just jump into it straight away, right? Like, for example, in very brief terms, in terms that I can understand, and I'm nobody in terms of science, but I call myself an enthusiast at the best. But how does a traditional vaccine work, right? Like, how does a vaccine work? Because in India, I don't know about America. In India, when a kid is born, he's vaccinated like left and right.
Yes.
I still have a BCG vaccine mark on my hand and so on, right? So
Okay.
what is the idea of a vaccine though?
Yeah, so just like in India and US, we also get tons of vaccines when we're young. And the vaccines are just a way to introduce your body to be on the lookout for a certain bacteria or a certain virus in the future. So if they ever see it, to destroy it. So it's like a training system for your body to say, okay, like this is not a good thing. So if you see it in the future, make sure you destroy it before it has a chance to get you sick.
Right. And so the traditional vaccine style is like you just try to generate a response in the body as if it's being attacked so that it keeps the memory within the body. Is that how it works?
Yeah, so traditionally they actually use like a weakened form of the virus or
Mm,
bacteria, or even like a piece of the virus or bacteria that's been inactivated.
mm,
And that's what they'll use as like an injection into your body. So the reason they do that is, if it's weakened, it doesn't have a chance to actually make you sick. And
right,
then if it's a piece, it's only one piece of the puzzle. It's not all these pieces, so it can't make you sick, but it still
right.
gives your body that ability to make the recognition.
Mm. So when it comes to COVID-19 vaccines, right? So is this the first time this mRNA technology has been used, or has it been used before? What were the historic examples? I mean, what is this mRNA in a very quick sense, right? So what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the mRNA in use for therapeutics has been used before in terms of gene therapy. They even have it used against some types of cancer, and it's still ongoing research. Just like my own research, we're
Mm,
trying to investigate how can we better design this RNA to target different diseases.
mm,
And then in related to vaccines, mRNAs in vaccines for different clinical trials have been used for influenza and for Ebola, but those haven't been approved. They're still in the trials right now.
mm.
Some of those trials, they take a long time,
All
and
right.
due to the state of this pandemic, though, those trials were for SARS-CoV-2 were
Yeah.
sped up.
Mm,
But the mRNA itself is actually really like a pretty cool design, and it's one of the reasons why these vaccines came out so quick, is
hmm.
because it's really just instructions for your body. So
Okay.
our bodies always use mRNA. Everything we do is involved around making a protein, and in
Mm,
order to make those proteins, you need mRNA. So
mm,
mRNA is like the blueprint, and then the protein is what's going to make the function.
mm.
It's what's going to make you see. It's going to make you talk, listen,
Right.
feel. Everything that you do in your body relates to
Right.
proteins.
Right.
So the mRNA is really just delivering in instructions for your body to make a protein, and then we're hijacking that system to make a SARS-CoV-2 protein rather than
Mm.
a human protein.
Right, right. And is this what, so there are like some top vaccines, right? If we can take a look at
Mhm.
the names, right? So there is Pfizer, there is
Mhm.
Moderna,
Yep.
which are using the mRNA type. So these two, are there any differences between these two? Is just two competitors doing the same thing?
Yeah, it's really just two competitors doing the same thing. There's going to be a little bit of difference in terms of the way it's actually delivered. So it's
Mm.
delivered using something called a lipid nanoparticle. And
Uh-huh.
really, all that is just a composition of different fats, because all of our cells are surrounded by a fat called a
Mm.
cell membrane.
Mm.
And you need a fat to mix with a fat in order for it to merge. You can think of it like when you're cooking, if you put oil and water in the pan, they don't mix together, right? They
Mm.
separate. So
Yeah.
if you have two fats, they actually mix. So
Mm.
it's packaged in this lipid nanoparticle, or LNP. And
Mm.
that's kind of where the differences fall for these companies, because some companies can make the LNPs themselves, and then other companies are like outsourcing them from a
Right.
different manufacturer. Yeah.
Right. And what about this Oxford University's vaccine, right? I think they are tied up with like AstraZeneca, and they
Eh,
are using this method called like adenovirus. So
yes.
what is that exactly?
Yeah, so that one is it's kind of in the same realm of the mRNA. Like the idea behind the mRNA is to give you instructions to make the spike protein, and then your body will make an immune response against the spike protein, and that
Mm.
spike protein is what's found on SARS-CoV-2.
Right.
So that's what's going to elicit the immunity. And
Mm.
the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine is kind of doing the exact same thing downstream, but they're
Hmm.
delivering it in a little bit of a different way. So the way that they've done is now they've actually turned that mRNA, it's through a reverse process in the lab, they can make it into DNA.
Okay.
And that DNA is now put inside of a adenovirus, which has been modified. So the adenovirus, actually, we commonly have come in contact with adenovirus. Many people have. So we probably already have antibodies against
So
adenoviruses.
whoa,
So
whoa, whoa,
what?
whoa, 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 hang on, What is adenovirus, by the way?
Yeah, so adenovirus is just like a virus that can cause like a common cold.
Okay, right.
Yeah. So because humans already have come into contact, or most people have already come into contact with this virus,
Okay.
these companies needed to use a new system. So they're actually using a virus, an adenovirus that would infect a chimpanzee.
Mm,
So our immune system hasn't seen that before.
mm,
So that's a good thing. It means we're not going to destroy it before it can get to us.
right.
And what they've done is they modified that virus. So they can do this in the lab where they can actually take out parts of the DNA that allow it to replicate inside of us,
Mm,
or that allow us to make us sick. And they can cut those pieces out and then put it back inside the virus, along with the piece of DNA that our body needs in order to make the spike protein.
right.
So one of the ways I explained it in my video is like, you have like a filled donut.
Mm,
Think of like taking the insides out of the filled donut
mm,
and then filling it with something else. So
mm.
it's still going to, be the same thing, but now it's going to be a little different on the inside.
Wow.
And the virus now, this adenovirus, acts the same way as the LNP in the mRNAs, where it
Right.
comes in, it's going to infect our cells, and then it's going to release its DNA. So that's how most viruses work. They infect our cells and then they release their DNA because they think, okay, now that's going to help me replicate.
Mm,
But actually, because this has been modified, that DNA can't replicate.
mm,
And the only information now is that spike protein. So then your body turns the DNA to RNA
right.
and then RNA to protein, and then you elicit that same immune response.
Right.
Um,
Now,
it's a little, oh, go ahead.
you're talking about spike protein. Spike protein is just the outer part of the coronavirus cell. So
Yeah.
it has the information of the coronavirus, but it's not exactly as lethal as the virus itself. Is that am I getting that right?
So the coronavirus actually has 29 proteins that it
Mm,
needs in order to be a fully functional. So you can think of this like pieces to your car, but you're only getting one of the proteins. So that spike
mm,
protein on the outside, it would be like only getting the tires to your car. You can't
mm,
really like do anything with it.
right.
But you can recognize that that belongs to a car.
Mm,
So that's exactly what our bodies do. So it gets that spike protein. That spike protein by itself can't make us sick. It can't
mm,
give us coronavirus,
mm.
but it can at least give our bodies a little bit of an memory to say, hey, if you see this in the future, make sure you attack it.
Right, right. I'm sorry, you were
Yeah.
saying something. I interrupted you.
Oh, I was just going to say that and then the main difference between these mRNA vaccines and the viral vector vaccines,
Mm,
although like the efficiencies are a little bit different, but they're still both very high. The main like difference in terms of like how they'll be used is really just storage. So
mm-hmm.
unfortunately with mRNA, it's just very highly susceptible to degradation. So
Right.
it's not a very stable molecule. It can be attacked by a lot of different enzymes. Those enzymes can be in the air, on our bodies, just
Mm,
on different surfaces. And that's why it has to be kept super cold. The cold
mm,
is actually to prevent those enzymes that could destroy it from working.
mm, mm.
But the adenovirus viral vector vaccines, because they use DNA, that can be much more stable. So it can be
Yeah.
kept at room temperature. And these are like, that's going to be huge in order to get this, because not all of the infrastructure across the world can really handle keeping things super cold.
Yeah.
So, having both vaccines that both have a great efficiency, and having both available is going to be critical for, getting these vaccines out to everybody who needs them.
I think that explains why, like, the Oxford vaccine is a little cost effective than the other ones. Am I right? It's all because of the
Yeah.
logistics of cold storage and so on.
Yes.
Right, right. Got you, got you. Now, like, have you ever had a chance to study what India is doing with the vaccines? Have you ever looked at like what Indian vaccines are doing, like COVID Shield or Covaxin or something like that?
I have not. No.
Okay, okay. So apparently, I think Covishield is a vaccine which is in collaboration with AstraZeneca, and it is doing
Okay.
this adenovirus method. and
Okay.
Covaxin is apparently injecting dead coronavirus into.
Okay.
Does that happen? Does that happen?
Yeah,
Vaccination?
that happened. Yeah, so if you think of like getting the chicken pox or
Mm,
like measles or mumps, rubella vaccines, those actually all use a dead form of the virus that would
mm,
infect you. And those work very, I mean, we know that those work great. They've been given to people for decades now.
right.
And I think that they will work just fine
Mm,
for coronavirus too. The
mm,
only thing is it just takes a lot of time,
mm,
because you have to grow that bacteria, right? Or I'm sorry, you have to grow that virus.
mm.
It doesn't just grow by itself. You have to grow that in the lab and then collect it, kill it, or make it weak, and then make it into a vaccine. So, like one of the things with the mRNA vaccines, why they came out first is like there's this example I like to use in terms of like, say you get a recipe and like I want to share that recipe with, or I want to share that food with
Mm,
a bunch of different people.
mm.
Well, it's going to take me a lot longer to make that food for every single person than it would be if I just gave everybody the recipe and then they could
Yes.
all make it on their own, right? So
Yes.
that's what the viral, like the mRNA viral
Got you. Got you.
vaccines are doing. They're giving everyone
Mm-hmm.
the instructions, whereas like this one that you just explained is having to make all that
Right.
virus or that food by
Right.
themselves and then give it out. So it just takes a little bit longer, but doesn't mean it's not going to be as effective.
Mm, mm. The $1 million question obviously is how long the immunity will last, right? Because different vaccines
Yeah.
work differently. I think one vaccine that one example I can take is like the BCG vaccine that is, I think, given for tuberculosis, if I'm not wrong. The immunity of that thing lasts for like freaking decades, apparently,
Ever. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And some don't last long. What's your comment on the duration of the effectiveness of the immunity that this vaccines provide? How do you measure that? How about the COVID-19 vaccines?
So what we'll have to do is just keep monitoring people and like their antibody responses.
Mm,
Right now in the clinical trials, they believe they started in May.
mm,
And the individuals on those clinical trials, they obviously got the vaccine first, and then to now they still have antibodies against COVID. So that's
mm,
great. That means it's at least it's working for upwards of like 8-9 months.
mm,
So that's promising.
mm,
It doesn't mean that things might not change in the future, but I think the way to monitor it the best is just to look for antibody response and see
mm,
if we begin seeing surges of the virus again. Like if we all of a sudden, once more people are vaccinated, that's when we'll be able to see like, okay, case numbers should be going down.
mm.
But if all of a sudden case numbers begin going up, that means that something might be going not so great with the vaccine in terms of its immunity, or that maybe the virus has mutated too, which is another
Right.
big thing that can happen. Like that's what often happens with the influenza. It happens a little bit different. It's not quite mutations, but
Mm,
the reason that the flu you have to keep getting a booster every year is because it does change a little bit in terms of like the modifications of
mm.
that the flu uses in order to infect you. But and with COVID, we know right now that there's been several mutations that have
Oh,
raised some
please.
concern.
It's like a
Yeah,
World Cup, It's like, yeah,
I
UK's got its own strain. Now South Africa's got its own strain. Let's have a it's just, oh, it's
right. It's like
stressful,
they're all
yeah?
competing.
Yeah.
Everybody wants their own strain. But really the main way, this is gonna be like a little bit of a preview to like my newest video that I'm gonna hopefully
Mm-hmm.
put up soon.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the reason that these mutations occur is because it's spreading more. The virus can't mutate on its own. It's going to,
Right.
virus doesn't just sit on the surface and then start growing. It needs to be inside of us to grow. So that's going to be the biggest way to stop the mutations, is to stop the spread, which we
Yeah.
know has been difficult for people to follow the rules and to actually adhere to some of these guidelines. But really that's the only way we can do this right now.
Right. And that is exactly my problem with the idea of herd immunity, right? Herd immunity,
Mhm.
it sounds great on paper, but it also is an opportunity for the virus itself, to, take different shapes and
Take
forms and
ab-
throw
Absolutely.
new questions, right? Throw new questions at the
Yep.
vaccines, at your testing methods, and boom,
Yeah.
next thing you know, you have no clue what you're doing.
Yeah, that's exactly true. So it's like it's really not the best way to go about trying to protect people through just natural immunity. It really should
Mm,
be herd immunity via vaccines
right.
to protect everyone. But I mean, some of the mutations are not so bad. Like there was a mutation that was an very early on mutation came out last spring. I can't remember the exact like position where it happened, but actually the antibodies that somebody generates actually killed that virus better. So like that was
Mm,
a good thing. And now we see that with the UK, some data just came out yesterday or 2 days ago. Some preliminary data with the UK variant showed the antibodies work fine against that variant. The South Africa variant, there was some concern that it's a little bit less, but it doesn't mean it's not effective. It means
mm,
you need more antibodies. You need to be able to, have that immune response stronger. But that's another reason, why getting the vaccine is even better because the
yeah.
vaccine elicits a better immune response than if you had COVID before.
Right.
So far, nothing's pointing to like, no,
Mm,
absolutely nothing. We have to start from scratch. So that's a good sign right now.
yeah. Let's just go science fiction here, right? Like what exactly should happen with the virus to, completely evade the vaccine itself, right? Should the entire like the spike protein itself change, or what should go wrong exactly here? What are you
Yeah.
looking for? You obviously are keeping an eye on it, right? So what are you looking
Hmm.
for exactly?
Yeah, so the spike protein is definitely the most important because we know that that's how the virus uses its ability to get inside of our cells.
Mm,
But one thing that can happen is if the spike protein mutates too much, it's not going to be able to use the same mechanism to get into our cells. So I don't know if you've heard on the news before
mm,
that like the coronavirus infects us with via the ACE2 receptor.
mm-hmm.
So that's like a protein on the outside of our cell membrane.
Okay.
It pairs with the coronavirus. You can think of it like a lock and key. As
Right.
soon as it goes in, and then it can enter our cells.
Right.
So if it mutates too much, it's actually not going to fit on that
Mm,
receptor. So that would be a bad thing for the virus because then how
good
is the
for
virus
us.
going to get into our right? Good for us, bad for
Mm,
the virus.
mm,
But leaving the potential for the virus to use a different mechanism to get inside of our body, maybe find a different lock,
right.
and it can get in that way. That's something
Mm,
that I'm not sure if I'm sure people are looking at, but I don't think there's any preliminary data out there right now
right.
on SARS-CoV-2 virus getting into our cells,
Mm,
not through that ACE2 receptor. But
mm,
that's something that the virus also will want to keep in mind too. If we
right.
if we give the virus a personality, like it
Right.
wants to be able to get inside of our cells in order to survive and replicate.
Number $2 million question: why the side reactions, right? Side effects, as what we call in
Mhm.
India, side effects, side reactions. I'm guessing
Yeah.
because you're actually getting a mini COVID in your body, right? In a sense, so you'll have a mini fever, mini cold, which should be fine or it should not be fine. What are your comments on that?
Yeah, so your body is going to have some type of response because
Mm,
trying to you're trying to activate your immune system.
mm,
We want to make sure our immune system recognizes that that spike protein is not supposed to
mm,
be there, and
mm,
then it will start building immunity. Now that's going to be different for every person. So like just like we know everybody has a different immune response. Some people get
mm,
sick much more often than others.
mm,
Some people, they get worse common cold than others. So the immune response varies based on person, and that's just differences in some of the cells that are involved in your immune system.
mm,
But it's very typical that when you're building an immune response, you are going to have a fever or um, some chills, some soreness in the area, redness in the area. That means that white blood cells are going to that area. They're starting to fight it off. Um, some of the side effects that people listed through the clinical trial were like a headache, or just kind of feeling tired for the next day. I don't think anything lasted more than 2 days. So that shows us that like yes, people can have a response. You are getting a needle, injected into you. You are getting a vaccine. So you are going to have that response just like you would with anything else.
Yeah.
But I didn't see anything like more severe. If anything, the actual chances of like the allergic reactions and things like that were very, very much lower, because these at least in the mRNA vaccines, because they're not using some of the reagents that people have been allergic to in the past, like
Right.
egg or yeast proteins or adjuvants like aluminum. So all those things had much less effect with them. So that was a good sign.
Right. And it's also like, when you get fever, it is basically your body activating your immune response,
Yes,
right?
yes,
So
it is.
you must be afraid of every single fever that you get, because you
Yeah,
basically you're afraid of your own immune response. Like, come on.
yeah, right,
you know,
right,
you know
exactly. Good point.
and
Yes.
tell me this, like, because in India we have skepticism over few vaccines, confidence over few vaccines. What do you think are the basic parameters to decide if this vaccine is safe or not? Right? What are you looking at exactly? Are you looking at the testing method, number of trials, or
Hmm.
what are the parameters that we are supposed to look at as a common people?
Yeah, so you're definitely looking at the design and how the trials were put together. So
Mhm.
it's always important that, for something to reach a clinical trial, it needed to go through lab studies and then some animal studies, probably involving like mice, rats,
Mm.
maybe primates, and then eventually would involve humans. You want to make sure that like the clinical trials also try to include as many people as possible, like from different groups. So we're
Mm.
talking different ethnic groups, different age groups, different genders, different parts of the country, not just located in one area, because all those things are very important. We don't know if a group of individuals is more or less susceptible
Mm.
to the virus or not. So it's important to test all these different parameters. Then also just ensuring that the company had a accurate like control group. So that would be a group that received not the vaccine, but like a fake vaccine called a
Mm.
placebo, which is really just nothing, but it makes somebody think like, oh, maybe I got the vaccine. And then they test to see like, okay, did the person like feel better, or did they also have a fever? Like if they also said they got a fever, then it's probably like, okay, like that's not associated with the vaccine at all.
Yeah. The
So
ones
yeah,
the
just like,
one the ones that politicians are taking. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
yeah.
I'm just kidding.
So yeah, all those things are really
Mm.
good to measure and to just be on the lookout. And you want to, that goes beyond COVID-19 too, which
Mm.
is I think a great thing that is emerging because of this virus, is that the there's nothing wrong with people wanting to know how some of these drugs or vaccines work, especially in the future as we move towards a
Yeah.
more communication style world. It's good for people to want to ask those questions and not just think the worst, or these crazy hypotheses that are
Mm.
going around and rumors and myths. So if they can know how to go through the literature in the right way to say, oh, this trial did have a control group, this trial did follow these guidelines, that's good. And they can hopefully stop spreading propaganda because they can see at
Right.
least that these were thoroughly done.
Right. So what we are looking at is a diversity in the test subjects.
Hmm.
We also forgot to include testing on people of various medical conditions. Like, will it work on
Yeah,
diabetic
that's
people?
true. Yeah,
Will it work on someone who has some existing medical conditions and so on, right? So a
right.
wide
Yeah,
variety of sample group and proper phases of trialing, right? Phase 1, 2, 3,
yes.
and so on, right? With proper results.
Yep.
So that
Yeah.
those are the parameters we're looking at. And what are the top few skepticisms that are let's just call it the way it is, fake news, that you have seen going around? Like, for example, vaccine effect on pregnant women and so on. What are the top
Hmm.
two myths that you'd like to
Yeah.
bust?
Okay. So the top myth that I want to bust for either vaccine, whether it's the mRNA vaccine or the viral vector vaccine,
Hmm.
was that it's going to mutate your own DNA. This is just not possible. One, for the mRNA vaccines, is it's located in a different spot.
Hmm.
The mRNA and DNA are not even in the same location within your cells. They can't interact. They're not the same molecule. That's why they're called something different. And then for the viral vector vaccines, even though you are getting a piece of DNA, that virus actually can't become part of your DNA. So if you think of other viruses that they actually can become part of your genome, that's not what an adenovirus can do. And that's one of the reasons why this was chosen. And it's kind of like, if you copy and paste something, huge, like if you're copy and pasting from a website, you might copy the text and then paste it into your own, but maybe the text is a different size and it's much bigger or much smaller, or it's a different font. Like, it's not going to always fit, and that's what the chances of this. It's just not going to work.
Right.
And also, if we could do that, we would be solving so many genetic problems. There wouldn't be any illnesses, because we would be solving all of them, because we could just fix mutate people's DNA back to normal. So that's the biggest one that I think like definitely needs to be addressed, and hopefully people have gotten that addressed. And then the second one too, actually, related to what you said, is the pregnant women, receiving the vaccine. There was a myth going around that if you got the vaccine, you wouldn't be able to become pregnant in the future, and that's just not true.
Hey, this is vaccine, not birth control. What the? Come on.
Right, exactly. And if you look, so their argument was, oh, when you get the vaccine, you make this immune response, and then the immune response is what's going to not allow your placenta, like the woman's placenta, to form properly. And actually, if you think about if that was true, then anybody who had the virus in the past and survived, they also would have the same immune response. And we see that women who have survived the virus are still getting pregnant, and they're not saying that they lost a child or any babies while they were sick. And then furthermore, actually, one of my friends here, she's a chemist, and we did the entire blast system. Like, we put the sequence of the placental protein and the sequence of the spike protein of the coronavirus into this computer-based system that can tell us if things are similar or not. And actually, the similarity was less than 3%. So it's not, and that's common, because proteins can only be made from 20 different amino acids. There's only 20 different ones. They're all put together in different ways, but there's only 20 different ones we can use. So there's always going to be some 1, 2, 3% overlap of all our proteins, and there was nothing bigger for this protein. So that was a complete myth that somebody made to try to scare people.
So two things, folks. Your gene will not be modified to turn you into a zombie, number one. Number two is you will have kids, no matter COVID positive or vaccine positive, whatever, right? So don't worry about that. And what is this one more criticism, or sorry, skepticism that I hear is, which I also had, I'm guilty of having that, is because, generally, historically speaking, vaccines take a long time to develop, right? So, but this is one of the most fastest, maybe this is the fastest, most vaccine.
Fastest.
Ever developed in human history. So how am I supposed to rely on this efficiency? What about the testing? And this is a genuine I think this is a genuine question, and what is your answer to that?
I think that that's very reasonable, because that is all true. One of the things that these companies that normally did in the past, though, is they would compete with each other. So if we think about different drugs that they would make, maybe for diabetes or for heart disease, they would be trying to make the best drug and outcompete the other company, because they wanted the best price for the drug, of course. But now these companies actually decided to work together. So companies began working together. They decided to also begin working with universities or colleges that people had all other expertise, and try to streamline this research out faster. One of the things with the Oxford and AstraZeneca vaccine is they actually were designing this vaccine for the first SARS. So back in I think in 2004 or something like this, they had begun this process way back during that first initial outbreak, but then it never became of anything. So they kind of were like, oh well, we had this stuff, but it's not important anymore, so we'll just kind of put it away. Then this happened, they could reopen those notebooks and say, okay, this is what we saw, it didn't work back then, what are we going to change now for the future? And then, the mRNA is just a lot faster, like I mentioned with that recipe example. Like, we're just doing it, we don't have to make a bunch of virus in the lab, which takes a lot of time and takes a lot of resources. We're making our own bodies make that protein, so we're like hijacking our own system, but it actually is a much faster way.
Right.
So I think just a combination of better technology. We are always advancing. If you think about also 10, 20 years ago, did the iPhone even exist? That wasn't a thing. So things advance, things get quicker. Now we have, internet that works a lot faster. If you want to compare how technologies advance, the medical system is no different. The technologies are also advancing, it's coming out faster, and along with better collaborations and better communication among these companies.
But don't you think bioscience is a field that kind of evolves slower than, say, an iPhone, for example? Don't you think it's a little slower? Because one other question that I usually keep hearing is like, the old SARS didn't have a vaccine. Ebola, I'm not sure if it had a vaccine. How come they came up with this particular vaccine so fast and so on? So I believe it's like less greed, more collaboration, the urgency. I think these are the factors that led to development of this vaccine, and I think that's a fair way to put it. So capitalism, boys and girls, will not give you. Capitalism gives you 4 years vaccines and 5 years vaccines. This is what happens when you collaborate. All right. So that said, my family members, right? Most of them. I'm not sure about your family, but they are not convinced. How do I convince them? What are the most simplest ways? One way to convince them is to show your YouTube channel, which is wonderful. But in a simpler term, how can I convince them? What are the, where can I hit them?
So definitely, my family too is definitely still cautious because it is new and they are worried, and they don't know always how it works. I try to explain them as many videos as I can make to try to explain it as many different ways I can, and I think they're grasping it, but they don't have the same training as I do, so it's a little bit different, which is completely understandable. The way that I try to explain it best to them, though, is to say, look at the side effects that are happening if somebody actually does have the virus. If somebody contracts COVID-19, some people, they experience mild symptoms and they're okay. There's a lot of people that experience very severe symptoms and they end up, barely being okay. And then there's also a lot of people who experience severe symptoms and then they die. We see this across every country, every region. So this is not something that's specific to one group.
Right.
And how do you want to, if you're worried about the vaccine versus the virus, we see that the virus has infected, in the US alone, 20 million plus people, and we have over 400,000, 500,000 people are dead, versus the vaccine we've also given to around 20 million people and nobody has died because of the vaccine. People have died, after receiving it, maybe because of something else, and that's important to think about. And then of course those are the news stories that always hit the.
If you're dying in a truck crash after getting vaccinated, vaccine is not the cause of that truck crash. Like it's that simple.
Right, but the news would want you to think otherwise. So you put it to in perspective of those numbers too, and to say that we also don't know. One common thing that I always get is like, oh, you don't know any long-term side effects of the vaccine. And that is, from a science perspective, I can say like, look, mRNA, if you're getting the mRNA vaccine, the mRNA doesn't last very long. I work with mRNA all the time in the lab, and if I blink, sometimes it's gone. So it's just, it doesn't last. There's no reason for it to be sitting in your body for extended periods of time. So we think of other drugs, like people getting these very like chemotherapy cancer drugs, those can stay in your liver, in your fat for years and then cause damage later on. So that is a concern, and something we don't have data on because the vaccines have only been available for less than a year. But
Right.
we also don't know the long-term side effects of COVID. Some people
Mm.
still aren't back to normal, even after getting COVID last spring.
Yeah.
So it's take that also into consideration when you're thinking of getting the vaccine.
Excellent, excellent. I hope we have crashed some myths, broken some fake news. But here's the thing, man. You are the Neil deGrasse Tyson of vaccine science right now, in my opinion. I mean, I really request people to go onto his YouTube channel. That is Rob Swanda, ROB space SWANDA, and consume all the knowledge that he has to provide in the most simplest of languages, and he's doing it in multiple languages as well. I think you've done one in Arabic, in Spanish, in Chinese. I've
Yep.
seen all that. I've seen all that.
Yeah.
Wonderful work, man. Wonderful work. And before I let you go, please tell people where we can find your work on social media, YouTube, if you can, real quick.
Yeah, so again, you can find it on YouTube using my name, Rob Swanda. I post everything also on Twitter, which is where we first got interacted with. That's at Scientist Swanda.
Mm,
And then I also will post them on Instagram as well,
right.
which is at swandive_Rob. So really, all of them, we can leave a post on video where I can
Yes.
put those links,
Everything
or
will
the
be in the
tags. But
everything will everything will be in the
yeah,
description, folks. Watch his videos, make them your WhatsApp forwards, make them your retweets, make them your Insta
yeah,
stories. Spread the right information. That is the right information right there, folks. Thank you very much for tuning into this podcast. Thank you very much, Rob, for doing this. Pleasure having you, taking your time out
yeah.
from your very busy schedule. Must have been the most busiest time in your life, right? Because microbiology, you must be like relax. I mean, I'm not trying to downgrade your job, but this surely must be the most busiest time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, luckily I'm in my final semester of my
Mm,
PhD, so a lot of my projects are quite wrapped up, and it's just kind of finishing up some things, doing a lot of writing. But then yeah, these videos definitely have taken up in terms of the not just doing the video. Actually doing the videos is quite short, and all my videos
yes,
are like 2 to 3 minutes.
yes.
But it's like the responses and trying to make sure that if people do have questions, I do my best to try to answer as many as I can. I
Mm,
definitely don't get to all or even half, but
right,
I try. So
right,
that takes up a lot of time, but it's a good thing. I'm not complaining because I would rather address the myths
right.
than, to see people be misinformed.
I hope you don't have too many anti-vaccination folks on your channel because they are just annoying.
Yeah, not too many. And like
Mm,
some people try to use they know that now that I have this platform that's reaching people, so they try
mm,
to comment and lead to these
mm.
myths, and I'm not going to allow that on my channel. It's one
Oh,
thing to have
please.
a discussion, but it's another thing to actually put out misinformation, which is one thing I won't tolerate. But I'm happy to have a discussion if somebody is confused, but not about absolute propaganda.
Be like Twitter, bro. Delete those mofos.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
no
Yes.
mercy right there. It's
Yeah.
no
Nope.
no. Yeah. And what are the genuine questions that people ask? Like top two genuine questions that you get from from your social media.
Yeah. People tend to, they ask if it would be safe. They're usually concerned about a family member. Like they'll say, like,
Mm,
"Oh, I have a mother, brother, sister, somebody who has maybe an autoimmune disease,
mm, mm,
or they have had cancer, or they
mm,
have ALS. Like,
mm,
would the vaccine be safe for them?" So it's people that are definitely trying to look out for their family members. And
right.
I do my best. I always tell them, like, I am not a physician, so
Mm,
please check with your physician first. But all of the data and all of the recommendations that are being put out there show that people in those groups, autoimmune disorders, cancer, diabetes, etc., various other conditions, are much more at risk of death from
mm,
COVID than they are from, having just a typical COVID reaction that many other people experience, and then they are fine afterwards.
right.
So I always try to tell them, like, the vaccine is not, is a far better choice for you or for that individual because of the risk and that they're at, just based
Yeah.
on their other health conditions.
Right.
I would say that's probably the top one I got, before I addressed the pregnancy question with that video, I got a ton of pregnancy concerned, even from other physicians. Like there was other
Wow.
physicians saying like, oh, have you heard anything about this? I was like, yes, and it's not true. But so addressing that really helped to bring those questions down.
Lovely, lovely. Folks, go ahead, shoot your questions to Rob Swanda. Once again, ROB space SWANDA is on Twitter, is on YouTube. Hit him up, watch his stuff, forward his stuff, share the right information, and get rid of your skepticism for vaccines. They work, and they work big time. Thank you very much, Rob. Once again, that's it from the Sollu Kaburz podcast. Till we see you next time with another episode. Bye, everyone.